What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Tonight, Randy and I are going to be addressing a topic that was left by one of you guys on the last live stream and try to break down the 5 things that we do to go when we get to the lake to guarantee that we put a fish in the boat. This is not about catching the biggest fish, catching the most fish. These are 5 things that you should do every single time you go to the lake just to put a fish in the boat so you don't get skunked. I think it's a really good topic, and we'll get into the winner of last week's giveaway who submitted that comment. But before we do that, Randy, let's say hi to everyone here on the stream. And how's it going tonight, Randy?
Doing good, Johnny. Just getting back in the swing of things. Had an on-the-water lesson yesterday. Been working on the Fish the Moment lake map breakdowns. Been hauling kids around school activities, and looking forward to tonight's podcast. It seems like, things are changing out there now. It's like, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but you can feel like the seasons are beginning to change. The more leaves are starting to fall off. There's a different feel in the air. And it's sort of nice to have seasonal changes in bass fishing, and so I'm sort of enjoying it a little bit.
That's awesome. I love this time of the season. Fishing is not the best right now, but I love when you get the times are changing, the fish are moving. I love when you have to kind of re-track down those fish. A lot of the fish have been in the same kind of general areas for the past few months, and that gets me bored. I don't like knowing where the fish are. I like when they're on the move and I have to hunt them down. So it's a pretty fun time of the year for me. They're tricky to find, but I actually like it when it's harder on the lake. That's what makes it fun for me, putting the puzzle together.
Yeah, for so many years, when I was fishing the Bassmaster top 100s and top 150s, we started our season in the fall. So we had 3 tournaments, or actually half of the season was between like September and December. So I've always just loved fishing this time of year. It's a different type of fishing. The fish, they're just in a different mood. Their personalities are different. Techniques are different. And I miss it. I wish they'd go back to a lot more fall tournaments. Actually, I've got 3 tournaments coming up in October. I've got 2 Bassmaster Opens and that Toyota Series Championship. So I'll get to be doing some fall fishing this year, in tournaments, that is.
It's awesome. I love those fall tournaments. Love watching the old Bassmaster TV shows, going to Lynn Dollar on YouTube, finding all those old Bassmaster shows. I actually have all the Bassmaster shows on DVD. I got them from a guy on eBay who actually recorded them, and he sent them all. I have like every single Bassmaster TV show that's ever aired on DVD in my closet. So I've watched all those so many times. I love that. I'm a big fishing nerd with all that stuff. I have like every Bassmaster magazine from like 1999 through now, basically. So got a whole archive of stuff.
That Lynn Dollar YouTube channel is really cool because he does archive all the old Bassmaster and FLW tournaments. I think they're on there.
For sure. Yeah, definitely check that out on YouTube if you haven't seen it. Lynn Dollar.
Yeah. It's a different deal, man. If you guys out there that were around back in the 80s and early 90s when Bassmaster was the only thing out there, I mean, it was pretty neat the way they did it.
For sure. Well, before we jump into it, I want to say hi to everyone who's on the stream. We got Ryan, Joe, Ernest, Christopher, Bill, Mike, PK, Ron, Chad. How's it going, guys? A bunch of other guys are in here as well. PK said he saw you over in Branson the other day, Randy. He says he's not stalking you. I don't believe him, but he saw you coincidentally over in in Branson. Just messing with you, PK. But it's awesome. And then Bill said he caught a 7.5 pounder yesterday. That is a good fish for August. So great job there, Bill.
Yeah, that is a giant.
Awesome.
That's a giant in September, a 7.5 pounder.
Especially here, if you're not fishing, maybe in Texas it's not, but around us, a 7.5 pounder is a big one. Anyways,
Bill's from Kansas, so a 7.5 pounder in Kansas is like a 10 pounder anywhere else, it seems like.
That's very true. Awesome. Well, let's kind of jump into it here. First things first, I got to give credit for the topic of today's live stream to a winner of our last week's Bridgeford giveaway. It's the astrophysicist guy. So this guy obviously knows what he's doing. Astrophysicist gave us a great question. He got a lot of likes, got 17 likes on this comment too. So that's the reason I picked it. It just got the most likes. It seemed like people really liked this question. And his question this week was, what are the top 5 things bass fishermen who only get to fish 1, 2, or 3 days a month on the weekend should do every time they go fishing to guarantee they'll catch a fish? So that was his question. We're going to address it. Randy's going to give his 5 things that he would suggest weekend anglers do to always catch fish, and I'm going to give my 5 things. And because we picked your comment, astrophysicist guy, we're going to be sending you a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky, 12 packs of jerky straight to your house. Just send us an email over info@fishthemoment.com. Just send us your mailing address, and we'll have Bridgeford ship a case of beef jerky straight to your house. Huge shout out to Bridgeford for supporting and sponsoring the Fish the Moment podcast and live stream. We could not do this without them. They're our one and only sponsor, so definitely support Bridgeford at your local Walmarts, Academy Sports, gas stations, wherever you can find them. They make amazing beef jerky. They make other snacks as well, pepperoni, salamis, different things like that. And if you guys need snacks when you go out to the lake, definitely pick up some Bridgeford beef jerky. A lot of guys I hear on the stream have been trying it because of the live stream, and now they're addicted to it, which is what happened to me too before we got the sponsorship. Randy is the Bridgeford pro, and I would always sneak some out of his boat, and I'd be eating it nonstop. So I'm addicted to Bridgeford now, thanks to Randy. So hopefully you guys get addicted too for Bridgeford's sake, because it's really good stuff. So anyways, big shout out to astrophysicist guy for the great comment and for winning the prize. We'll announce how you guys can enter into this week's giveaway at the halfway point of the live stream, about 45 minutes, 30 minutes in, so you can enter and win a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky for the next stream. So anyways, Randy, let's jump right into it and start talking about the top 5 things you recommend fishermen, weekend anglers do that get to fish once, twice, or 3 times a month to put fish in the boat every time. What's your number 1 thing?
The first thing that I'd suggest, guys, is to concentrate on points. You know, the thing about points that are great about them is bass live on them all year long. It doesn't make any difference if it's January, August, November, whatever. There's going to be a population of bass living on those points all year, particularly in man-made reservoir, man-made impoundments, but not necessarily, because points can be just as good if you're fishing a natural body of water. A lot of the points that you have in natural bodies of water are more like shoals that extend off the bank. But nevertheless, for everybody out there, which is the majority of the people on this live stream, you're fishing man-made impoundments. The key on fishing points, guys, is they're a good place to find bass really quick at, because there's really just a couple different ways you need to approach them. On most every point that you're fishing, there's going to be actually 3 different groups of fish living on the same point most all year long. You're going to have a group of those fish that are going to live shallow on the point, close to the bank. You're going to have some that live halfway out from the point, and then you're going to have some out on the deeper point ends and sides where the drops are and where any cover is out deeper. And depending upon the water clarity that you're fishing in the lake, that's going to determine a lot of where those bass are positioned at, and also the species of the lake. If you have a lake that has a combination mixed species bag, those fish will position a little bit differently. But if you're wanting to go out and find quick, say for example, you've never been to a lake and it's the first day you've been on it, you don't know where to go, you want to find the bass quick, look at your map and just identify 2 or 3 major points in the major creek arms and on the main lake, and start fishing those things. Because I guarantee there's bass living there. You just have to figure out how to catch them. That's my number 1.
That's a great tip, Randy. And one thing I will say is with these points, if you can find one that has a creek channel close by where it drops off really sharp on one side, always helps. It brings in more fish there. But you can also catch them on the rounded points. They're just on points all over. One question I will have for you, Randy, is I have Table Rock Lake pulled up here while you're talking. How do you know which point to go fish on Table Rock Lake when there's literally thousands of points? How do you kind of differentiate which point to go to versus...
The first thing on Table Rock and a lot of the Clearwater lakes that I try to determine is whether the bass are on the main lake points or the secondary creek points, because normally sometimes they're on all of them, but a lot of times they're on one of the other. I have sort of a rule of thumb about fishing points that on a lake specifically that I don't know much about, is I'll run maybe like 5 points, and I'll try to mix them up between a few steep points, a few flat points, medium size creeks, main lake, coves. And if I fish like 5 or 6 points without a bite, then I sort of scrap that particular type of point and I move on to the next point. And once I get a few bites, then I can start duplicating the point a little bit better, as far as just like Johnny, what you just said, Johnny, as far as its relationship to deep water or its rock composition or the slope of the point, and trying to narrow down what actually makes the point better at that particular time. And also the things that make that point good can change day to day, because a lot of times weather conditions have a huge impact on how good points are, because points for a lot of the year, a lot of them, you have a wind generated bite that will create a temporary feeding window just because of that wind. You have a window that's created by time of day as far as the sunlight intensity and the shade that hits it. And then also, you got a variable of the water clarity with that. And all those combined are going to allow you to narrow that down a little bit.
For sure. That's great stuff. It's kind of similar to mine. My ideas here. And, one thing about Randy is he thinks offshore, or he thinks fishing points is completely dope. When you don't want to swing for the fences, you got to go out there and, it's all about the live scope. And, what was the other two, Randy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I can't remember all that.
Oh, man.
On that YouTube video I got some great comments as far as things I missed on it. I missed about most of the good ones on there. So, yeah, that was pretty fun.
That was good. If you don't know what we're talking about, Randy did a video about 5 things he hates that fishermen say, and so I was just throwing a bunch of those strung together for you. I was hoping to have that planned. I completely forgot now. Thanks for the comment there, Matt, in the chat. I was actually going to have them all ready to go and write up a whole sentence of them. I completely forgot, just to mess with you, but hey, got it pretty close. Anyways,
well, I haven't heard you say dope yet, Johnny. So you're in that age category. So maybe it's a regional deal or something.
Yeah, well, flat bill Johnny. We have a little bit of curve in the bill, but I used to be flat bill Johnny, and he would say dope a lot. But no, we bend that bill a little bit, and we don't say that.
Yeah,
I'm much more of an old soul than a. I'm not up on the slang as much. My favorite TV show growing up was Hogan's Heroes. If you've ever watched that. So that was my jam back in the day. So kind of an old soul.
I got a lot of mine out. Do you guys ever remember Harry and Charlie on Bassmaster Magazine, the cartoon? Do you remember that, Johnny? Harry and Charlie?
No, I don't.
Are you kidding? Harry and Charlie, well, let me, real quick, I want to tell you a quick story. Harry and Charlie was a cartoon that came out, a cartoon story that Cliff Shelby wrote for Bassmaster for 15 years back in the 70s and 80s. And it was about these two guys that fished out of a flat bottom boat with a 3 horsepower motor. And the terminology that they used in there is that's sort of like what I go by, is like Harry and Charlie, 1978, 80. I know you guys on the breakdown. I mean, I know you guys on the podcast listening know who Harry and Charlie is, at least some of you guys.
Oh yeah, Matt's saying he loves Harry and Charlie, so that's awesome. Yeah, that was before my time. I didn't read Bassmaster magazine until basically the 2000s, so it was a little bit before my time. #tangent. Anyway, so next up, guys, is my number one thing that I would recommend guys do to find fish or catch fish every time you go to the lake, and it's similar to what Randy had talked about here at the end with the points. Now, I'm going to pull up Google Earth just to kind of give you an idea. The number one thing that helps me find and catch fish when I go to the lake is identifying which section of your lake the fish are relating to. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. On a man-made lake, you can basically look at a creek, or on a natural lake, you're going to look at your bays. And I'll explain both of them. But basically, on a man-made lake like this is Lake DeGray in central Arkansas. Here's a big creek. Out here is what I would consider the main lake. It's just kind of out here in the middle of nowhere. You have the actual mouth of the creek. This is a very narrow creek kind of in here, but you could even call this the main lake, this the beginning of the creek, however you want to define it. We could even use one of these that's even smaller. So main lake, first third of your creek right here, middle of your creek, back of your creek. Whenever I go to a lake, I want to determine which section of these creeks these fish are in. So for example, I'm going to start by looking for fish out here on the main lake. And if the fish are not there, I don't seem to get any bites, let's say an hour fishing the main lake, I'm then going to move into the first third of the creek and spend an hour fishing the first third of a creek. Then I'm going to spend an hour fishing the middle of the creek, and then I'm going to go to the back of the creek. I'm basically breaking up these creeks into these sections. And usually, if you're going through a creek like this, you're going to find that the fish are set up somewhere in these creeks in one of these 4 sections. Now, they're probably going to be in one of these sections. That doesn't always mean, though, that they're going to be necessarily biting the techniques that you're good at. So, for example, I might not find any offshore fish in this creek, even if I check all 4 sections. But maybe if I head further down the lake to this creek, maybe this creek has fish that are set up offshore. So what I always do is I try to spend hour, maybe 45 minutes checking out the first part of this creek, middle, all the way to the back. And if you know your seasonal patterns, a lot of times you can actually eliminate some of this, where you basically can just like cut out the back of the creek and the middle of the creek in the summer, because most of the fish are on the main lake, and vice versa in the spring. A lot of the fish are in the backs of the creeks, in the middle of the creeks, and you can cut out the main lake. So once you understand seasonal bass movement a little bit better, you can eliminate some of this. But basically, breaking up those creeks into sections will allow you to determine where the fish are. And let's say that for whatever reason the fish are in the first third of this creek, and I really end up catching like 2 or 3 fish pretty quickly in this part of the creek. I'm then going to ignore the other sections in the other creeks, and I'm just going to roll over to this creek and fish the first third of this creek as well in a similar area. One thing you really want to be cautious of is you don't want to try to run the first third of every single creek across the entire lake. Usually that section that's good, that first third, is only good in like a 2 to 3 mile area of the lake. Like this area, maybe like right here, maybe those fish are set up in the first third of every creek in that big isolated area. But if you then move further down the lake, let's say down here, maybe all the fish in this area right here are all set up on the main lake for whatever reason. So you don't want to just assume you can replicate all over the lake. So kind of part of this is pick a section of the lake you want to fish, then find out what section they're in that like 2 mile area. And I do that every single fishing trip. I go out, I pick one section of the lake I'm going to stick with, and I fish it all day long. I'm not running down here all the way up here. I'm sticking to like a 1 to 3 mile section of a lake, and I'm going to learn it really well, break up those creeks into those different sections, and I'm good to go. What do you think of that, Randy?
Totally agreed with that there. The systematic approach to those creeks like that is probably the most efficient way to find them quick, because it breaks down the lake into a manageable size. And that's one of the biggest things that intimidates a lot of guys getting into the sport for the first time is it's like, where do you begin? And using that system that you described there, it just makes it a lot more less intimidating. Even for guys that are good fishermen, because I mean, and I'm not just saying that for weekend, starting fishermen too, but even for good fishermen.
For sure. Awesome. Well, what's your second one, Randy?
Okay, my second one's going to be focus on using shaky heads and Ned rigs a lot. And again, these can be used on the points that I just talked about or whatever. But guys, as far as getting bit, if you guys just want to go out and generate strikes, there's very few baits out there that will allow you to generate as many strikes under such a wide range of conditions as a shaky head and a Ned rig will. Those baits will produce in a lot of different water clarities. They'll produce in every single water temperature you have. There's not a single geographical place in the country where you can't catch fish on those. So just narrowing it down to those 2 techniques, fishing them around those points, you're going to get bit. It's just a matter of figuring out a couple key elements. And again, those key elements are identifying the right point and then identifying the exact shaky head and Ned rig setup. And when you're talking about choosing and getting the most out of your shaky heads and your Ned rigs, talking about shaky heads first, you have to determine the color that they want and the size of the worm and the size of the head. Those 3 variables are going to be a big player in there. For the most part, what I would suggest is have 2 different types of shaky head setup. I would have like something like a 6 or 7 inch, like a Zoom trick worm on like an 1/8 ounce head. That's a good bait for catching numbers and size, and then have a smaller size like a 4-inch finesse worm or a little 4-inch robo worm on a 1/16 of an ounce shaky head. And sometimes that real light shaky head on the little 4-inch worm, it'll catch a lot more bass, especially if you have a lot of spotted bass and a smallmouth on the lake. That will do really good. Same with the Ned rig. Ned rig is going to be color sensitive. It's going to be weight sensitive. There's a couple different schools of thought with that. I've heard a lot of guys that like to go heavy with their Ned rigs, like up to like a 3/8 ounce. And I know a lot of guys that they never like to use anything over a 1/16 of an ounce. So again, on your Ned rigs, have one light, have one heavy, stay with the colors that match your water clarity. If you're fishing water clarities that are like 3 feet or less, go with the darker colors like a June bug. And if you're in that clear water, go to your watermelons and your green pumpkins. So my advice on that is have 4 different setups, 2 Ned rigs with 2 different colors, 2 different heads, 2 shaky heads, 2 different colors, 2 different sizes. Fish those main and secondary points, and you will get bit more than not on that.
That's great advice, Randy. That also sounds like my fishing purgatory. Having 2 Ned rigs and 2 shaky heads on spinning rods all day, that I don't think I would quit fishing if that was how I had to fish. But it will work. I'm not knocking the information, but that is not, this is not how I would not enjoy fishing if that was what I had to do.
Yeah.
It's funny because when we made these lists, Randy has like completely different 5 things that he does to guarantee he catches fish versus my 5. We're like completely different. It's very interesting, and we both catch fish.
The thing about the Ned rigs, guys, those Ned rigs they'll catch the biggest smallmouth in the lake. I mean, there's tournaments that get won all the time on Lake St. Clair with 5-pound averages on Ned rigs. And my stepson, Owen, he caught a 27-pound bag of smallmouth out of the back of the boat with me on St. Clair on a Ned rig. 27 pounds. So they will catch giants,
Yeah, for sure. Especially on those smallmouth. Really, really good deal.
Yeah.
Okay. My second thing that I always recommend guys do when they get to the lake to catch more fish, and it's very simple. The first one is like breaking those lakes up into sections. Very, very straightforward. You can do that just by looking at a map, looking at Google Earth. The second thing is I recommend not spending more than 15 minutes fishing any one given spot. This is the number one mistake I see new anglers make and a lot of inexperienced anglers when they try to get out to the lake, is they will pull up and they will find, let's say, a bank like this. And they will fish down this entire bank from here all the way through here, all the way down. They'll fish the entire bank. They'll hit every single thing, and they'll fish it with 4 different baits. And they're like, man, I need to really see if they're on this bank. And they might spend 45 minutes to an hour fishing down this stretch of bank. This is maybe, let me see how many yards. This is, 800 yards. They're going to fish down this entire bank. They might fish, like half a mile down this stretch and trying every single bait in the tackle box to see if the fish are there. Maybe they want a crankbait. Maybe they want a chatterbait, a spinnerbait. That is a huge mistake, guys. It's something that's just wasting a bunch of time. What I find is that in general, when you get into an area where you start catching fish, you're going to get bit within the first 15 to 20 minutes of being in that area. And if you don't get bit in that time, you need to move on. Part of this is fishing quickly down this bank. Not that you need to be fishing fast-moving baits, but fishing key areas, key targets. So, for example, if I was going down this bank right here, the key areas for me are going to be, I'm just going to mark them with little pins, all of these points that are going to be right out here, like the actual points themselves, that's going to be key areas that I really want to target. And then also the backs of these pockets. If I was fishing down the shore, for example. I don't do that as much as Randy does, but just, bear with me. But basically, the backs of these pockets and these points, those are kind of like your ins and your outs. They're really going to be key for you on these spots. And if I was going through this area, I'm going to make sure I make several casts on these key little areas, the points that stick out and the areas that jut in, and I'm going to cast at any sort of cover I can find, whether that is a laydown, rocks, something that's down there. And I might start by fishing down the bank with a crankbait, and then when I get further back in the pockets, I might flip a jig up there, and I might fish a different crankbait around this point, and then I might throw a spinnerbait or a chatterbait, and I might try 4 or 5 different baits while fishing down this bank, but I'm only going to make maybe 5 to 10 casts per bait, 5 casts per bait, because when you're fishing pretty quick down the bank, just making casts, you can basically make maybe 2 casts a minute, if we're being generous, 2 casts a minute. So if you're spending 15 minutes on a spot, that means you can make 30 casts down this bank. Well, if I was going to do that, I would try to make 5 casts here, 5 casts here, 5 casts here, 5, 5, and then maybe 5 in here off this point. You can basically make 5 casts off of 6 key spots down that bank and maybe switch up 2 to 3 different baits. If you don't get bit in that situation, you need to move on, and not just move on down the bank like keep fishing. Pick up the trolling motor, get on the big engine, and actually run to like the second half of this creek and repeat the process. 15 minutes, spend it fishing this point, this point, and this point. And if you find that you're not catching anything, then completely change it up. Go back out to the main lake and maybe find a steeper bank or something different and fish this for 15 minutes. If you don't get bit, keep moving and changing. You have no idea how many times when I fish where I basically get bit within my first 5 to 6 minutes of being on the spot. And then once you get bit, you can actually know that there's fish in this area. Like, let's say I pull up in here and I get bit off this point out here. There's a really good chance if I get bit within 4 or 5 minutes off this point, there's probably going to be some fish off this point and this point. Maybe there's like a little road bed or something right here that's sticking out. Maybe off of a couple of these points. I'm able to then duplicate where I caught those bites in a similar area. But I'm not going to slow down and really thoroughly fish an area until I'm getting bites within the first 15 minutes in that spot. The other thing, too, again, to call out is that I might make some casts with a crankbait on this point, but I also might throw that shaky head or a football jig or something else, and I'll fish slow, but I'm not going to move slow with my boat, basically. I'll throw a slow presentation like a jig, but I'm only going to make 5 casts on this point. And then I'm going to move and make 5, 10 casts on this point, 5, 10 casts on this point. And the only time I'm going to sit down and really slowly fish these areas is if I'm getting bit. Then I'll really slow down, make 15, 20, 30 casts on each point because I know there's fish now in that area. Would you agree with that, Randy?
Yeah, that's definitely true, and that's the thing about it. I think that's one of the biggest things, the mistakes that I see a lot of people learning to fish and just getting into the sport is they really don't know how long to spend on a spot. They have a hard time really judging the potential of an area, and just learning to judge the potential of an area and maximize your time that you have in the water where you're not in dead water. That's a huge thing. But the key is you want to stay in water that has potential to get a bite as much as you can. You don't ever want to feel like you're just casting. You want to be in a situation where you feel like you can get bit on any cast that you're making.
For sure. And again, just moving and changing spots quickly. It seems weird because I think a lot of guys are thinking that what if I'm missing the fish? Usually bass aren't going to let you miss them. If they're up there, they're going to let you know pretty quickly. You don't have to worry about fishing over fish unless you're like not very good at casting or you're splashing your lure in there really heavily. If there's going to be bass in there, they're going to let you know pretty quick. Would you agree with that, Randy?
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Awesome. Cool. Let's jump to your next one then, Randy. Number 3 for you.
Okay, real quick, I'll just answer a question from Andrew. He says, what plastics I throw on Ned rigs for smallies? Most of the time on that, I use, I like that zoom beat down, but I bite it in half. For smallmouth, you'll get a lot more bites if you bite a Ned rig down to like less than 2 inches. That's a big key on it. Most Ned rigs you buy out of the package, the plastics are too big, so bite them off a little bit. Okay, the next one I'm going to talk about is one of the big mistakes I see a lot of anglers make, and one of the things you don't want to do is like when you finally start getting a few bites and you start catching a few fish, say, for example, you find them with a shaky head on the points we're talking about. You can't, when there's an old adage in bass fishing that holds true, there's a lot of myths out there, but there's a lot of stuff that holds true. You never want to leave biting fish to find new fish. Most of the time that will bite you when you do that. So what you want to do, and another piece of advice I'll give you guys for catching the most amount of fish, if you got a short period of time, is once you start getting a couple bites in an area, don't leave that area until you've exhausted the range of techniques that could work in that particular area. Let's just go back to the point situation, for example. Say you get out on a main lake point and you start catching 2 or 3 fish on a shaky head in 15 foot of water out towards the end of the point. Instead, and then it sort of dies off after that. You're not getting any bites, but you did catch a few fish there. Unless you have a live scope and you can see exactly what's down there to know if there's any more fish. One of the things I would suggest is before you leave that, mix it up a little bit. Instead of going to the shaky head, throw a football head jig and snap it off the bottom on there to try to trigger that strike. Throw a hair jig out there and try to see if they'll get it. Toss a Carolina rig out there and see if they'll get that. Then you might move up a little bit shallower on the point, throw a shallow running crankbait for some wind on it. But what you want to try to do is you want to try to maximize the potential of those areas before you leave it. And I've seen this time and time, guys, over and over again in tournaments. You'll have, say, one guy pulls up on a main lake point and doesn't catch anything, and then the next guy rolls in there, pulls up there with a different technique, and wins the tournament. I've seen that over and over and over again. So only leave an area once you've exhausted the potential, what you feel as far as your range of techniques are. Don't get in a big hurry. If you're getting some bites, there's usually something special about that area, and only make a move after you've exhausted all the possibilities.
That's great advice there, Randy. And one thing I'll kind of add on top of that, this is something that used to burn me so much, is like, let's say you start finding them on a specific point, for example. I've actually had this happen in this creek before, Randy, on Lake DeGray. Maybe you're catching them on this point. I was catching them on this point in the Carolina rig in like March or February. And we hammered them here. Well, then we're like, oh, well, let's go find more points. And for whatever reason, I didn't think, let me just fish all the points that are in this creek. I thought, because I caught fish off of this point right here, this is the only point in this entire creek that's holding fish. So I then ran across the way and started fishing these points over here across the creek. Or maybe I would try to run like way over here and fish some of these points over here. If you start getting bit in an area, let's say off of a point right here, a smaller area, try every single piece of structure or cover that resembles this area within like a 200-yard radius, so like in here. Don't go too far away. Not only don't leave fish off this one spot, but once you start getting bit off the spot, there's probably going to be 2 or 3 other places, small little areas around here that hold additional fish. They might not have as many fish as the first spot you find, or they could have more. But stay within like a 200-yard radius of where you caught those initial fish and really soak that area. That's how I catch so many of my fish in my Catch 15 challenges, is I find fish in one spot and then I just stay within like eyesight of that area. Like literally just be able to see the same spot, and I find similar areas very, very close by, and that's how I end up catching my fish. So don't run all around the lake too trying to duplicate a pattern when you catch one fish on a point. Just stick around, and you'll probably catch more fish. Would you agree, Randy?
Yep, absolutely. That always works for me, man. If I get running around too much and try to cover too much water, my success usually goes down with it.
Yeah, for sure. Good deal. Okay, so next one for me, Randy, my third one is going to be find the bait fish. This is super critical for me, especially offshore fishing. But in general, it's really critical. If there's bait fish in an area, there's usually going to be some bass somewhere around there. Bait fish include shad, perch, bluegill, any sort of forage for the bass. And this could also include crawfish. Crawfish could be something those bass are feeding on. But you need to find some food for the bass. If there's no food in the area, there's not going to be any bass there, period, end of stop. There needs to be some sort of food for those bass to eat to survive. Otherwise, there's no point in them being there. So what I always do, guys, is when I'm going through the lake, I use my electronics a lot to graph for bait fish, especially on these man-made lakes. But if I was fishing up north, for example, I might decide that I'm going to go look around, fish around and see if I can see some bluegill or some perch. I'm going to scroll way up here. I'm way up north. I might try to see if I could find some bluegill or some perch in some of these grass beds. Right now this lake is frozen, so maybe that's not the best example. Maybe like in some of these grass beds, though, out here on this lake, if I can see some bluegill or perch visually with my eyes by looking at them in the grass, because the water can sometimes be clear up north, or by seeing them on the fish finder, something like that, you need to find that there are bluegill around to get those fish to bite. Don't just go fish an area where there's no wildlife, there's nothing. And 2 easy ways to find out if there's bait fish in the area is, one, obviously we talked about the electronics, just graphing them with your fish finder. You can watch any of my YouTube videos. Recently, my Catch 15 series, I always show bait fish in my sonar images. You'll always see bait fish around because that's what the bass feed on. But you can also, fishing on the bank, you can just look for blue heron or birds on the bank. If you see a blue heron on the bank and I'm fishing up shallow, I make it a rule of thumb for me, Randy, since I don't fish up shallow that much anymore. If there's a blue heron on the bank anywhere, I'm going to pull up and fish that bank. And it works out a lot more often than you would think. And it doesn't matter if it's a flat bank, a steep bank, anything. If I see a blue heron perched up against a shoreline, I'm rolling over there and fishing it 95% of the time, even if it's not fitting my pattern, because those blue heron are there to feed on bait fish. And blue heron aren't stupid. They are hunters. They're predators. If they're there, it means there's some sort of forage that they can feed on. So I'm going to go over there. And then if I'm fishing a lot of shallow vegetation, like let's say lily pads or something, a lot of times you can hear bluegill pop in the surface. You can hear it in the lily pads and stuff. And if you're not hearing perch or bluegill popping on the surface. You're not seeing them on the electronics. You're not seeing birds in the area. You're not around fish. And there's days, Randy, where I have literally gone around on Lake Dardanelle driving the boat up and down the river like a madman, and when I see a set of blue heron on a jetty or on a rock wall or something, I pull over there in front of a stretch of grass. I pull over there and I catch them, and then I roll to the next spot, and I'm literally fishing the bird pattern. I'm watching the birds because that's where the bait fish are, and that's where the fish are. It's super simple, not hard, but if you pay attention to those nature cues or use your fish finder to find the bait, you're going to have a lot more success.
Yeah, the blue herons, man, those things are unbelievable. I got the quick story I'll tell you guys about a blue heron. I was fishing a Bassmaster Invitational down at Lake Texoma years ago, and I was cranking the riprap on the dam, and up in front of me there was this blue heron, and I was fishing towards it, and all of a sudden this blue heron just nailed its beak in the water, and it speared a 2.5-pound smallmouth, took the smallmouth and flung it behind its back about 10 foot up on the bank, and flew up there and swallowed the thing whole. I'd sit there, I can't believe that. That was like the most impressive displays of nature I've ever seen.
That's crazy. That's awesome. One question here from Jesse is, if there are bait fish in the area but a ton of gar eating all over, will the bass still be close by? Sometimes, not normally on that exact spot, but if there's bait fish in that area, maybe the gar are on like one point, but if you move like 50 or 100 yards over, maybe the gar aren't on the next point and the bass are on that point. So if I'm seeing gar all over, usually I don't see a lot of bass set up. So if you're seeing a bunch of gar, probably not a good sign that there's bass there. But that doesn't mean that there's not bass within like a 100-yard radius or 200-yard radius of that area, because there are bait fish around. So wherever the gar is set up, I don't actually find that many bass, but I will find bass nearby, with like nearby relative is like 50 to 100 yards away from that area. So, good deal. Okay, so, Randy, before we jump into your next one, we got number 4 for you. We were ripping through these. I want to recommend, or I'm going to let you guys know how you can sign up for our Bridgeford beef jerky giveaway that we're going to be doing. We do this every single live stream at the halfway point. We give a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky away, or we don't, Bridgeford does. So huge shout out to Bridgeford for sponsoring the podcast, being our title sponsor down here. Look at that. The only sponsor we got in the podcast, so definitely support them. Apparently, I heard from Jess that there is a sale on Bridgeford beef jerky at Dollar General. So if you guys want to try some Bridgeford beef jerky on sale, go to Dollar General. They got it. So just go there, pick it up, try some. And if you guys want to have a chance to win a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky, what I want you guys to do today is let us know what your favorite recommendation is, or favorite piece of advice to help you guys catch fish on every single fishing trip. What would you do? What do you always do to ensure you catch fish? Whether it's picking up the shaky head, or maybe it's always wearing the same pair of socks every single time you go to the lake. Maybe you have a special pair of fishing underwear you've never washed before in your life. Whatever it is, let us know your secret for always putting a fish in the boat down in the comments of this YouTube video, and then we'll pick the best comment from there, and we'll do a giveaway and name you the winner for our Bridgeford beef jerky giveaway. And big shout outs to the astrophysicist guy for giving us the idea for this live stream, and also for great comment there. If you send us an email over at info@fishmoment.com, we'll send you a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky. And so just send us your shipping address and we'll get that mailed out to you. So big shout out to astrophysicist guy. And again, let us know what your crazy or interesting techniques are for always catching fish down in the comments of this video to enter to win. One other thing, we got a bunch of stuff coming to the website, guys, fishmoment.com here very soon. I want to talk about one thing. We've been kind of on a slow trend for getting new stuff on the website, but there's a bunch of projects we've been working on. Randy and I are really excited to announce a couple things that we've been doing. So next week we should have some updates for you on all that. But just a couple ways you can support the channel, guys, if you guys really like the content here and want to help us out a little bit more. One thing you can do is always check out our lake breakdowns. We have a ton of lake breakdowns where you get 40 GPS waypoints for lakes all across the country that you can download straight to your fish finder. Randy has a ton of fall breakdowns. They're going to be perfect for the months coming up here in September through October or November. We have breakdowns for a bunch of different lakes all across the country, and Randy is working on more every single week, so definitely check out these fall lake breakdowns. 40 GPS waypoints, detailed area descriptions, just a great way to get a head start on your fall fishing. And then also, if you guys want to help support the channel, one very easy way is to head over to our support Fish the Moment tab and just use our Tackle Warehouse link right here, guys. All you have to do with this Tackle Warehouse link is go here. Here's the link. Just click on it. It'll take you to Tackle Warehouse, and you'll see that there's a special URL up here that you can't see because my screen is cut off. Let me try to... No, it doesn't work. I'm trying to drag it down. It's not doing what I want it to do. But basically, you can use that special URL by clicking that link on the website. And then if you bookmark this page that opens up, you can actually just basically save this Tackle Warehouse link every single time you check out. Just bookmark it to your tab. And every time you use Tackle Warehouse, we'll get a small percentage of the profits of that sale. So super helpful. If you're already buying tackle from Tackle Warehouse, it's a great way to support the channel with literally no effort other than just going to the website, clicking this link, bookmarking it. That's it. Really appreciate it if you guys did that. So other than that, Randy, let's jump into your next tip. So what's your fourth tip for always finding bass?
Okay, the fourth one, guys, would be to go out and throw a topwater bait under low light conditions. Now, obviously, this centers around water temperature a lot, but most of the time when you're talking about anytime you have water temperatures above 55 degrees, whether it be in the spring or the fall, when it's starting to rise above 55 in the spring or fall, before it falls below 55 in the fall, there's going to be an early morning topwater bite that is usually the easiest way to catch fish right off the bat. And so what I'm looking for this on, topwater depends again on the time of year. If it's the spring time of the year, I tend to start fishing right off the bat in the back of the coves. Those are really good. If it's the summertime or if it's in the late post spawn, this time up to this time of year, I'm fishing topwater early on the main and secondary points. And then as the fall goes on a little bit later, I'm moving back into the coves and the creek arms fishing them. Top waters that you want to throw are, in my opinion, completely dependent upon the water clarity. If you have water clarities that are over 3 feet, I really like to use a walking top water, something like that. Sometimes a wake bait can be really good. If I'm fishing dirtier water, I'm using like some type of a popper or a chugger, buzz bait, something like that. But that's one of the quickest ways to catch bass that you'll ever find is like getting out earlier in the morning when the shade's still in the water, low light conditions, or later in the evening, or on those low light days where it's heavy overcast and especially raining. Anytime it's raining, if you guys are fishing in the rain and the water temperature is over 55 degrees, there's always a good topwater bite somewhere on the lake, just depending upon, figuring out what that bait is. But that's one of the best ways, guys. If you're fishing any time between April and October, for the first couple hours, get out there and try a topwater and keep at it as long as it's working, because sometimes they'll bite it all day long. It may slow down a little bit. You may sacrifice the number of bites for the size up in the day, but it's one of the best ways that you can have to catch fish right off the bat on the lake.
Awesome. Good deal. I don't ever take advantage of the topwater bite, Randy. I'm always graphing when everyone else is on the bank. Because I launch my boat and I just go straight to graphing. So I kind of miss the topwater bite, but I find that I just catch them better if I just ignore it and just go graphing.
Yeah.
That is definitely good advice. Awesome. So for my next tip, Randy, what I would give to you guys is, I'm going to pull up Navionics here, is try to fish near deeper water. And what I mean by fishing near deeper water is, even if you're fishing shallow or you're fishing deep, you want to try to find areas that are in close proximity to a little bit steeper, deeper water. So if we take a look at, for example, at this creek right here on Sam Rayburn Lake, if I was going to go out here and try to fish on this spot and trying to catch fish every single trip, I would really focus on areas where you have a deeper creek channel. Like, for example, right here you can see this creek channel, and then there's a sharp drop-off where those contour lines get really tight together then drop off. And then you have this big flat area. This nice flat area is not necessarily deep water, but it's close to deep water. Having that close proximity to deep water versus like this bank right here, if you look at this bank, it's a really long ways before you get out to this creek channel out here. It's probably a good 200, 300, 400 yards till you get to that deep water. I would not really like to fish this bank that much versus this bank over here that is 50 or 30 yards from deep water. The reason for that is because a lot of these bass are going to use the deeper water, the creek channels, things like that, as migration routes. So basically they're going to migrate back in these creeks using these creek channels or just using deep water in general, and then they'll pull out of that deep water onto these flatter areas to feed and then go right back into the creek channel. Well, it's much harder for those bass to jump from the deep water out here over to the bank to feed because they have to swim over like 200 yards of just flat water. Instead, they might pull up here on these offshore areas. Now, if you're fishing offshore, this is a great spot to fish. So it's kind of like flip-flop for me. So when I'm fishing up shallow, I like to fish where the deep water is pretty close to the bank. When I'm fishing offshore, I actually prefer where the deep water is really far away from the bank. So in this situation, the bank is way over here, the deep water is way out here, but there's this in-between area where you have this big flat where it drops off from deep or from shallow to deep water very quickly. This is a ledge right here. This is a really great area to find fish offshore. You have shallower water really close to deeper water, and that's going to be very effective. Here's another ledge right here. Deep water close to shallower water. It drops sharply off. Now, like this bank over here, this is a lot better bank for me to fish because that deep water right here, this 30, 40 foot of water, is pretty close, 20, 30 yards away from this bank. That's a good bank for me to fish. I can give you a better example if I pull up Sam Rayburn and we kind of take a look at this creek as well. From this perspective, you can actually see this very clearly. Here is a bank, basically like right here, that is not that close to deep water. You have deeper water out here, deep water over here. There's a little bit of a cut that cuts in here, so it's probably maybe not the best example. Maybe this bank right here is better. See how far away this bank is right here from really deep water? Those fish have to move a long way to get into this bay. Oh, sorry, I'm not showing Google Earth. Let me pull up Google Earth. Sorry, Randy. Right there. Here's this bank. This bank right here is super far away if we take a look at this lake. This is when the lake is drawn down like 10 feet. So normally it looks like this, but we can actually take the lake down, and on Sam Rayburn in this image you can see it like 15 feet low. But basically you can go in here, see how this bank is super, super flat, and it's a long ways before it gets to the deeper water, like way out here. This bank right here is probably not going to have as many fish on it, except for in the spring. Maybe like during the spawn there might be more fish up here, but most of the year you're not going to find a ton of fish right here because those bass have to make a long trek from deep water to move way up on this flat. Vice versa, let's say you have this bank right here. This bank at normal pool is set up right here. Here's all your grass and stuff like this. If we take the lake back down, see how close this area is? Let me highlight it. I'm just going to put a little edge. This is where the normal bank line is right there, where that line is. If we take the lake back, see how close that bank line is to deep water? This is like 30 foot of water. That's a great area for fish to migrate through using this creek channel, then stop off, jump into this area and feed, and then pull back out. Well, I'm not saying that you need to be fishing deep water all the time. You could be fishing in a foot of water on this point up in here, but it's very close to deeper water, which is where those fish use, which is what the fish use as a migration route. And you can even see it further as you get back in this creek, way back in here. Where would I be fishing in this whole area? I probably wouldn't be fishing these pockets and stuff way back in here or over here, except for maybe in the early, or like the springtime when the bass are spawning. The key points I'd be focused on instead are like, see right here where you have this little tiny creek channel, this little bit deeper water that cuts in right here, right up against this bank. This bank right here is going to be perfect because it has that deeper water access for those bass. Same thing with this island right here. It has deep water cutting in tight to it. And they may be all around this island, on the backside in through here, maybe even in through here, but there's deep water close by. And that's usually going to hold more fish in general, and you're just going to be able to find them a little bit quicker. Would you agree with that all, Randy?
No doubt, and that just goes to show you that's another good point. It's like, you can spend, you can cut off so much of your elimination time just by looking at the map like that before you go out there. You can find those little areas like Johnny's talking about. You can get yourself a dozen or so of them, highlight them, areas that you think are high percentage areas from the Navionics and Google Map, and it just cuts your time in half or more.
Sure, it's not super complicated, but you have to kind of think a little bit logically through it. If you want deep water my rule of thumb is deep water 30 to 40 yards from where I'm fishing. I need some sort of deep water. And deep water is very relative too, because like on a Arkansas River, I might see that I'm fishing up in a foot of water, and deep water is 5 feet of water. Because 5 feet of water is the deepest spot within 200 yards. So it's very relative. We're on Table Rock Lake, maybe deep water is 100 foot of water, and I'm fishing in 5 foot of water. So it's relative to the lake.
Yeah, and that's especially important for big fish because, with the exception of situations where you have the lake flooded out, other than that, most all the big fish I've ever caught have come in areas like that. You got to have that deep water relative to it somewhere.
For sure. Good deal. Okay, Randy, getting into the meat of it. What's your last tip? Your last tip to always put fish in the boat.
Okay, my last one, guys, is going to be sort of the opposite from the main lake and secondary points. My advice would be to go to the extreme upper ends of the major creeks on the lake that you're fishing. And one of the things that I think you have to realize is that all the bass aren't doing the same thing in the lake at any one time. I think that far too often you hear people talk about bass movement and bass behavior in really, really broad terms, as far as like the whole group is doing this, like, the fish are spawning on lake whatever now, or all the fish are deep. There's always a group of fish that are going to be deep, shallow, and at a medium depth, and suspended on any lake at any time of the year. And one of the things that will allow you to find them quicker than anything, because at some place you can run right to, is pick out 2 or 3 of the biggest creeks on the lake and go as far up those creeks as you can right off the bat. Some of the creeks have old creek channels you can access. Some of them are silted in and just have flats. Some of them are shallow and you can't get up them very far. But regardless of how that creek is laid out, start initially at the farthest points you can get your boat up there, and then begin working back out, say a quarter mile from that back end. And this works all year long with the exception of the dead of winter. It works in the spring, it works in the post-spawn during the summer, all through the fall. It's one of the first things I look for when I'm trying to find fish on any lake that time of year. I'm always looking for those fish that are in those extremities, because the fish that are in those extremities, not that you can't catch numbers, they're usually above average size fish. Sometimes they're a little bit harder to catch because it just depends on how the cover's laid out there. But basically what you want to do is you want to fish whatever cover is available on that particular lake. Some lakes, it could be flooded willows in the springtime in the back of some lakes. It could be boat docks. It could be isolated laydowns. It could be stumps. It could be shallow milfoil. It could be lily pads. Whatever the lake has to offer the cover in the bass. But what you're going to have is, by going to the back ends and those upper extremities, you're putting yourself around a geographical population of bass that live in a confined area like that. I can't tell you all how many tournaments get won or have been won in the back end of one creek, some place where guys will get back in there and they'll make repeated passes down the last channel bank in the creek, or they'll make repeated passes down shallow row laydowns, or they're flipping flooded willow trees if the water's high on the flat parts of the back end of the creeks. These are areas where groups of fish, where populations of bass will move back into these areas. And, it's one of the first places I look for, and it will allow you to find those fish really quick. Doesn't matter how well you know the lake or how well you don't know the lake.
For sure. And actually, Randy, especially if your lake has grass in it, like on Lake Washita, which I was using for the example, I've caught fish in the very backs of those creeks in January. If there's a lot of like hydrilla, milfoil grass back in the back of those creeks, you can actually find fish that live there year round. So it works in most seasons, but it even works in the winter if you have grass in the lake. That's the only thing I would add there. That's good stuff. That's a good tournament trick too, if you're going to try to go just like with no practice on a tournament and you just want to go and get 5 good ones, just roll the back of the creek, and you don't want to worry about graphing or doing anything crazy.
Yep.
Awesome. So my last tip here, Randy, is you mentioned using the shaky heads, using the Ned rigs, and I think that's a really good tip to consistently just put fish in the boat. My recommendation, guys, to you is to use your confidence baits. If you're trying to go out and catch fish, I know there's a big temptation because you guys go onto YouTube. I know you guys are watching YouTube because you're watching this through YouTube Live, and you watch a Tactical Bassin video or whoever it is, and they give you 45 new baits every single month that you should be trying. Every single square bill, swim bait, crankbait, all this stuff, and you want to go out to the lake and try it all. And that is a great, if you enjoy just buying tackle and experimenting with tackle, that is great. But what I've learned from fishing over the years is that it takes me 5 to 10 fishing trips to gain confidence in a new bait. Even if you catch them one time on that bait, it's hard to build confidence in it if you don't repeat that multiple times. I would say that I don't really build good confidence in a bait unless I catch fish on it 3, 4, or 5 times. So if you're just trying to go out and catch fish on the lake and you just want to go catch some fish consistently, I would recommend picking up a confidence bait, a bait that you've caught fish on in 5 to 10 fishing trips, 15 fishing trips, something that you always know you catch fish on, something you really like. Saw a comment before, one of the guys was saying he always catches them on a chatterbait. If you love a chatterbait, go find water where the chatterbait is working and find fish on the chatterbait. For me, my number one confidence bait, and this is not a shock to anybody, is my Fish Throwing Offshore Jig by Jewel Bait Company. I designed this football jig for Jewel. It's a 5/8 ounce football jig. I throw it nonstop. Randy's sick of me throwing this thing because I always throw it and I always catch fish on it. But if I had one bait to go catch a fish for the rest of my life and you put me on any lake in the entire country, any time of the year, I know I can catch them on a football jig. North to south, middle of the winter, hottest part of the summer, middle of the spawn, I can catch them on a football jig. And this is just the bait I go to. And when I do a lot of my videos, it's funny, Randy, you'll actually watch in my Catch 15 Challenge videos, my first fish comes on a football jig more often than not because that's the bait I'm just throwing to get a feel for what the fish are doing. I just know that bait really well. I've caught literally thousands, probably 5, 6,000, 10,000 fish. I have no idea. I've caught so many fish on a football jig over my life because I've had days where I've caught 50, 60, 70 fish a day on a football jig many times. So like it's just a bait that I love to throw. I know how to fish it. I know what I'm doing with it. And it's just, I always go try looking for football jig fish before anything else because I know I can catch them on it. Now, that doesn't mean I'm always catching every single fish on a football jig. Sometimes I'm catching them on a crankbait or a jerk bait or whatever other bait, a hair jig. And I have other confidence baits I like to throw that are in my repertoire as well. But I'm always looking for my football jig fish first because I have the most confidence in that. Then maybe after that, hair jig fish. That's like my second confidence bait. Third bait's a deep diving crankbait. And then it tapers off so on and so forth from there. But I start by the process of elimination of, let me start with my number one confidence bait first anytime I go to the lake, which is my football jig. And one thing that can be tricky is like if your confidence bait is a buzz bait, well, that's a little bit tricky to throw in the middle of the winter when the water temperature is 39 degrees. So maybe you can find a confidence bait that works year round. A great option for that is a football jig. Another option for that is a finesse jig if you want to fish up shallow. You can catch them on a finesse jig year round, flipping it, pitching it, fishing it down banks. Great bait. Another bait that you can catch them on pretty much year round is some sort of medium diving crankbait. Medium diving crankbaits are a great bait year round bass fishing. But just stuff like that. Find some baits that you feel like, if you have a shaky head, like Randy said, that's a good year-round bait as well. If you want to make your shaky head your go-to bait, pick that up and throw it. But I can guarantee you guys you're going to catch more fish if you just pick a bait that you have caught more than 10 or 15 fish on in your life. Don't just go to the lake if you have 1 day or 2 days a month to fish and you really want to catch them and go try to use the newest swim bait that you just bought off Tackle Warehouse or the newest bait that you saw me or someone else throw in a video. It's probably not going to work out that well. You should expect to maybe not catch any fish or maybe catch very few fish. So that's just a really big tip. It's hard to do because I know fishing, part of the fun is experimenting with new tackle. But if the fun of fishing is not the tackle for you and it's actually catching fish, just stick with 1 or 2 baits and just go with it. What do you think, Randy?
Yeah, and that gets back to what I was saying about maximizing the potential of the area because, like, I've seen you, when we fished together before, Johnny, and you'll start out with that football head jig most every time, catch a few fish on it, but then you've always got something else to maximize the spot, whether it be a hair jig, Nico rig, shaky head, drop shot, crankbait, whatever. So your confidence bait like that, yours is a football head jig, mine is like a flipping jig or something, or a jerk bait. Once you locate some fish with your confidence bait, that's when you can really, mix it up with some other techniques and sort of maximize that. But And the reason people have confidence baits is because it produces for them. I mean, it produces for them on a consistent basis. And the key is not to get locked into your confidence bait to the point where it becomes a detriment.
For sure. It can be tricky. That's why, like, for me, I love that my confidence bait's a football jig, because it's a year round. I can stroke it, fish it off the bottom fast, stuff like that. I got lucky where my confidence bait works. I've never found a fishing day where I can't catch them on a football jig in any condition, dirty, shallow water, clear water, anything like that. But it's definitely one of those deals where if your confidence bait is, like I see, like a spinner bait for Bill, a spinner bait can work in a lot of situations, but it may not be the best bait year round all the time. It can be a little bit seasonal. So one recommendation may be, if you want to start catching more fish consistently, find a bait that works year round. If you're fishing offshore, I would highly recommend a football jig. If you're fishing shallow, maybe a finesse jig or a flipping jig or something that works pretty much year round. Maybe a shaky head. Pick up some baits that are more that you can use in the middle of the winter and the middle of the summer. That's a big deal for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's a good lesson you can learn from sort of observing pros, what their confidence baits are versus the success. Say, for example, if you take like a David Fritz, who has a confidence bait of the deep diving crankbait, or Rick Clunn, who has a spinner bait or a square bill as a crankbait, they have had great amount of success, but they've had a lot of inconsistency. Now, if you take somebody like Larry Nixon, that a Texas rig worm or Cinco is his confidence bait, he's been a lot more consistent over the years. So there are certain confidence bait, just like your football head jig, that will produce under a wider range of conditions. And most of the time, those confidence baits that are bottom bouncing lures that are worked slower are the ones that are more productive in a big range of conditions.
For sure. Good deal. Awesome. And I see Bill says he can fish that spinnerbait at any depth. Big respect to you, Bill. I hate fishing a spinnerbait. I've tried to catch fish offshore on the spinnerbait for years, and I still can't do it. I don't know why. I throw it and throw it and throw it, and then I throw a football jig in there and catch him. I don't know. I have like this. It's kind of like me with like the fishing gods. They don't want me fishing shallow anymore for some reason. Whatever reason, whenever I go fishing, like I went fishing on the other day, and I'm gonna have a video posting this Friday, Randy, where I went to Kerr Lake in Oklahoma. The water was ripping. It was like current was flowing. It was great. The water was high. It was in the grass, all this stuff. And the 2 days before I get there, they shut the current off and they dropped the lake like a foot. So there's no shallow grass in the water. And I'm like, I can't catch a break up shallow. So I think I'm like that way with the spinnerbait too. Like the fishing guys just don't want me catching them on a spinnerbait for some reason. But
yeah, here's a good rule of thumb with that. The moving baits are so situational. If you're a moving bait fisherman and that's your confidence bait, you're going to be inconsistent. I can promise you that your consistency will not be that of somebody that pitches or flips a creature bait or jig or drags a worm or football head jig. There's something about the strike reflex on a bass that you have to have the factors line up a lot more specifically on any type of a moving bait, whether it be a crankbait, a spinnerbait, chatterbait, whatever, versus the bottom bouncing lures. I mean, that's just been proven to me over and over again. And I love to fish moving baits. And I look back at a lot of the tournaments that I sort of fell on my face a little bit. Most of the time it was because I stayed with the moving baits longer than what I should have. I should have picked up a shaky head or a drop shot or a jig instead of just keep throwing that crankbait or whatever I was using at the time.
For sure. Completely agree. Okay, a couple things real quick here, guys. First thing, if you guys are enjoying the content here, like the information, you want to support us just a little bit, one easy way to do it is head over to fishmoment.com and check out our Fish Moment Lake breakdowns. Randy has a ton of fall breakdowns he did from last year, and we're putting out more every single week. You get 40 GPS waypoints that go straight to your fish finder. We have a guide explaining how to do that. We give you detailed area descriptions, keys to fishing the lake, and a bunch of great stuff. You can find these lakes for all the different seasons. We have the fall breakdowns here, September through November, and you can pick them up on lakes all across the country. A lot of great lakes right there. And then every Monday, we also update our personal lake breakdowns. If you scroll all the way down here, you can actually see Randy has his personal lake breakdowns that he has. We restock them every Monday. I don't know if there's any available right now. There's one available, maybe. It looks like it's not out of stock, so maybe you guys can check these personal lake breakdowns out. If we don't have your lake, Randy will break it down for you. And then also head over to Support Fish of the Moment tab and just use our Tackle Warehouse link. If you guys don't want to buy a breakdown or whatever, just use this Tackle Warehouse link on the Support FTM page. Click it, bookmark this page that pops up, and then every time you use that bookmarked link, you're supporting us, and we get a small percentage of the profit. So super simple ways to support us, guys. And we have a lot of cool projects coming up. We actually are talking to a couple different professional anglers, maybe do more challenge-style videos with some other pros, because I know you guys are always asking us to bring in different guys. I think you'll like who we have lined up, so I think you guys are going to be enjoying that. We're wanting to do a little bit more like, the competition-style content over on my main channel, Fish at the Moment, and we're going to be doing like live scope versus no live scope, graphs versus no graphs, flipping versus whatever. We're going to try a bunch of different challenges, and we got two really, really good pros that we have lined up potentially. So stay tuned for that. Also have some really cool products coming to fishmoment.com that you guys are really going to love. I've been working on them for a very long time. And then Randy and I have a project. There's so much going on, guys. There's been kind of like a radio silence from Fish at the Moment on a bunch of different stuff because we have so many projects cooking right now, kind of getting prepared so that we can give you a ton of great resources going into next year so you can hit 2022 just like hit the ground running and catch a bunch of big fish. So that's kind of the plan. Remember, guys, if you guys want to get submitted into our Bridgeford beef jerky giveaway, just let us know down in the comments of this video after it posts what your secret is to always putting fish in the boat, whether that is a secret bait, whether you wear the same pair of underwear for the past 10 years, the special pair of socks, you always bring a horseshoe in the boat, whatever it is, let us know your secret for always catching fish, and we'll pick one comment from the comments, and then we'll pick you next week to win a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky. This week's winner was Astrophysicist, guys, so huge shout out to him. Send us an email at info@fishmoment.com and we'll send you a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky. So huge shout out to Bridgeford for sponsoring our podcast. They also apparently have a deal on Bridgeford beef jerky at Dollar General. There's a promo right now, so go pick some up on sale if you want to try it out. It's a great snack for the boat. So that's pretty much it, Randy. Anything else you have before we sign out for tonight?
No, thanks again, guys. Much appreciated you taking some minutes out of your evening to join us with the podcast here, and we hope to see you guys next week too.
Yeah, we'll see you guys next week. We're not taking next week off for Labor Day. We're just going to keep rolling, keep putting the content out, so we'll see you guys next week, and hopefully you guys are enjoying the content. So check out Randy's channel, Intuitive Angling with Randy Blockett. Check out my main channel, Fish the Moment. Subscribe to the Fish the Moment live channel and like this video. Really helps us out. We say it every week. We have 197 guys on here. If you all left a like on the main YouTube video, it would help us out a ton. So just go down there, leave a like on the video. Helps us out a lot. So again, thanks again, and we'll see you guys next week. Have a good night.